أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum. We are into the 8th day of the month of Ramadan. For this year we started with the section on Surah Al-Kahf, not the entire surah, but the story about Prophet Musa alayhi salam, his meeting with Hazrat Khizr. And we have reached to almost the conclusion of the events. Just to summarize and continue with this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted Musa alayhi salam to realize that there is somebody on the earth at the same time as him who has a knowledge of certain dimensions of the existence that Musa was not given that knowledge. And the command was to go and seek him. The indication was given, the location was shown to him. And he with his wasi, Yusha bin Nun, went and located where is Hazrat Khizr. Initially Khizr as the teacher and Musa as the student. Basically the student asking permission to be in the company of the teacher, and the teacher was hesitant. But after insistence of Musa alayhi salam, Hazrat Khizr allowed, with a condition that you will not ask any questions or raise any objection to what I do, unless I say it. And so then we know that, 3 incidents took place. We talked about it in the last 3 nights. First was the issue of the boat, where Khizr damaged it. Number 2 was the killing of this young man. Number 3 was repairing the wall which is on the brink of falling down. And this happened in a village or a town where the people were not hospitable enough to give food to Musa and Khizr, and probably Yusha was with them. And so Musa objected to that in a very mild manner, very mild compared to the objections he had in the first and the second case. Because the first was violation of the property of somebody else, the way it looked. The second was violation of the life. The third was not really a violation as such. Rather, he was saying these people are not grateful enough to host us and to give food, and you did this work free for them. You should have asked for, at least food in return for that. And that is where, now Hazrat Khizr says this is the third, objection, and that is the end of our session. And so this is where we come to ayat number 78, where Khizr alayhi salam says, قَالَ هَذَا فِرَاقُ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ. O Musa, this is the parting between me and you. You can no more continue with me, because you don't have the patience. Of course, remember we said this patience is not the negative, aspect. It's not that Musa was, besabra. Rather, he was basically, the reason he objected to the first and the second cases was because he was looking at things from Zahir and objected to it. And this is where, Khizr says, سَأُنَبِّئُكَ بِتَأْوِيلِ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. I shall inform you of the interpretation of what you could not bear with me patiently. Ta'wil. There is a tafsir and then there is a ta'wil. Tafsir is what you talk with about, an ayat of Quran and the zahiri meaning, what looks the way it is in the words. Ta'wil is actually, discovering the inner dimension of it. is from awwal, going back to the inner dimensions. And so this is where we see that, Khizr alayhi salam decided to dismiss his student now. That you can no longer be in my companionship. However, as a benevolent teacher, he said, before you leave, I'll give you the explanation and the rationale for what I did, things that you objected to. So before you part, I'll give you the explanation. We'll deal with the first explanation today, and next one tomorrow, and then we'll continue with that. فَأَمَّا السَّفِينَةِ, as for the boat, فَكَانَتْ لِمَسَاكِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ فِي الْبَحْرِ, it belonged to the poor who worked in the river. فَأَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَعِيبَهَا وَكَانَ وَرَاءُهُمْ مَلِكٌ يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ سَفِينَةٍ غَصْبًا. It belonged to the poor who worked in the river, and I decided to render it defective because there was a king over them who seized every boat by force. The details basically is that these boatmen earned their livelihood by transporting people and goods from one end of the river to the other end, and this was their only source. So they were not poor in that sense that they didn't have anything to live on, but this was their only livelihood. And that is where Musa alayhi salam kind of, when he saw Khizr damaging the boat, he was kind of saying, how can you do it? This is violating the property of somebody else. Khizr made the boat defective. Why? And this is where he gives the explanation. Because of their king, who was coming from upstream, and whenever he would see a boat which was in good and perfect condition, he would seize the boat by force, not give anything in return or compensation, but just ghasban, which means taking something by force without any right. And so Khizr alayhi salam basically, by making it slightly defective, this is the point. Khizr made that boat slightly defective that they could still work on it, repair it. By doing that, he was actually not harming them, he was actually saving them. And this was one explanation that Khizr alayhi salam gave to Musa for the very first incident, which is to do with the boat. And this is where we have to realize that, and there's a lot of things to learn, and inshallah we'll continue till next week on this. What are the lessons that we derive from this whole story? I've been talking about many side issues connected to these stories, but we'll come more specifically to the lessons that we learned from this. Number one, Khizr was aware of the inner dimension of issues, while Musa was only looking at the appearance of things. He saw the boat belonged to this poor boatman, this is their livelihood, and they had basically got on it as passengers, paid the money only to be transferred from one end to the other, not to damage the boat. As a Nabi who had the Sharia, he couldn't take when he saw Khizr damaging it. But because he was looking at it only from the Zahiri perspective of things, he didn't realize that Khizr was doing this actually to help the boatmen and not to harm them. And this is where we have to realize that almost in many situations, not all, but many situations, there is a Zahiri dimension and a Batini dimension. Many times in our own lives, we are not able to handle things because we just look at the Zahir. We don't know there is a batin to it. Maybe later on it will become manifest and clear for us. For example, if you look at this issue, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Baqarah talks about the Zahir and the Batin situations. As a general rule, Interestingly, this is an ayat which was revealed when the Muslims were told to go for jihad. And going for jihad is not an easy thing. There is loss of chances of losing life, property, being damaged. And so, Zahiran, by looking at the appearance of it, this was a difficult thing. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you are just looking at the appearance of things. And as a general rule, then He says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرُهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Asa means, sometimes, تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا. You dislike certain things, but you don't know, هُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. What you dislike is actually khair and better for you. Eventually you'll come to find out. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌ لَكُمْ. And it can even be reverse. There are certain things you really like it, but at the end you will see it is not khair, it is shar for you. Why it is so? The answer is very clear. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. You only look at what is present. You only look at zahir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at the end. What will be the end of this process or this situation? He is looking at the batin of it. And so sometimes it happens, and this is a general statement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for us that, asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum. Many things you don't like it. Later on you say, well, at the end I'm happy with what I have. And sometimes you like things, later on you regret. Then you say, what happened to me at that time? Why did I make this decision? And this is where even one of the du'as that you recite in the month of Ramadan, du'a iftatah, there is a statement there, very beautiful. From Amir al-Mu'mineen, he is teaching us that, Allah, you have done this for me, you have done that for me in the past. And relying in your mercy, your compassion, your love for me, فَصِرْتُ عَدُؤُكَ آمِنًا وَأَسْأَلُكَ مُسْتَأْنِسًا. And so therefore, banking on your past mercy and love for me, I sat down praying to you, asking you with familiarity, لا خائفا ولا وجلا, without any fear. مُدِلًّا عَلَيْكَ فِيمَا قَصَدْتُ فِيهِ إِلَيْكَ. Expressing to you what I want from you. فَإِنْ أَبْطَى عَنِّي. These are very important words relevant to this theme. فَإِنْ أَبْطَى عَنِّي عَتَبْتُ بِجَهْلِي عَلَيْكَ. How many times we do dua, after dua. चिल्ला रखते हैं 40 days. दुआ की फिर भी जवाब नहीं मिला. It happens, huh? You do dua, there is no answer. And so what do we start to do? فَإِنْ أَبْطَى عَنِّي. And if it is delayed, my prayer is delayed in response, أَطَبْتُ بِجَهْلِي عَلَيْكَ. Out of my ignorance, I blame you. I say, Allah, what is happening? وَلَعَلَّ الَّذِي أَبْطَى عَنِّي هُوَ خَيْرٌ لِي. But then I don't realize that what has been delayed for me, although I want it now, but Allah is delaying it. What has been delayed for me, هُوَ خَيْرٌ لِي. It is better for me. Why? لِعِلْمِكَ بِعَاقِبَةِ الْأُمُورِ. Because you know what is the end of issues. And this is where we have to realize that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is the story that sometimes when we look at zahir, we ignore the batin, we look at present, we don't know what is to come in the future, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best. So sometimes when the du'as are delayed, there is a reason for it. Or sometimes He doesn't give what we want. There's a long story, we'll leave it for some other time. And so what we see this even in the seerah of the Prophet and the Imams. Before when I go to the example that I had written down, let me talk about another example which came to mind just at the last moment when I was finalizing this. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this story in the life of the Prophet known as Sulh Hudaybiyah. Everybody knows about it? This is in the 6th year of the Hijrah. And it is Sulh Hudaybiyah. It is a peace treaty. But what kind of peace treaty was it? Look at the zahir of it. Number one, the negotiator on the other side from Mushrikeen, when Rasulullah started dictating the words, that this is an agreement between Muhammad Rasulullah and so from Mecca, he immediately said that if we believed in you as Rasulullah, we wouldn't be sitting and having a peace treaty with you. We don't believe in you as Rasulullah. Write down Muhammad bin Abdullah. Rasulullah said, okay, I am Muhammad bin Abdullah. Whether you believe in me as Rasul or not, Muhammad bin Abdullah is acceptable. That's fine. And then the conditions came in, that there will be truce for 10 years, no warfare. All those who are allied to the Muslims of Medina will be part of this agreement, and all those who are allied to the other tribes, to the Mushrikeen of Mecca, will also be part of this agreement. So any violation from any alliance on either side, the chief party would be responsible to deal with it. And they were also, if there is violation, how this violation should be handled. Then there was certain conditions that the Mushrikeen had proposed and insisted on it, and Rasulullah accepted. One was that if a Muslim from Mecca runs away and flees and comes to you in Medina, you will have to send him back to us in Mecca. What about the reverse? If there is somebody who is in Medina, a Muslim, changes his mind, becomes a murtad, wants to run away back to Mecca, it's okay. We don't have to send him back. And not only that, actually right at that time, one of the individuals came and they had actually chained him, and he somehow ran away from Mecca, came to Hudaybiyah, and he said, Rasulullah, rescue me. The Muslims said, we can't send him back. Rasulullah said, no, we signed the agreement. He's saying, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, and he was pulled and taken back to Mecca. These are the zahiri circumstances. And this is where we see Umar ibn Khattab saying that I never doubted the nubuwwat of him until that day. Because this is where people were looking at the zahir. But then look at Quran. Look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This event in Quran has been mentioned. There is a whole surah about it. The surah has been named after that event. But what is the term that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses? Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. Fath, victory, in what sense? There was no war. The conditions don't seem to be in favor of Muslims. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that in form of this peace treaty that you have signed, I have given you, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Fath Mubin, an obvious victory. Why? Because he knows the consequences and the people didn't know. Look at the 6 years before Sulh Hudaybiyah and the remaining time of Rasul's life after that. For 6 years after Hijrah, Mushrikeen continued to fight Rasul and his followers. They came all the way, Badr, Uhud, Khandaq. They came to Medina. Muslims didn't go there. And all these situations where they were constantly fighting, trying to crush this new movement known as Islam. So for the first 5-6 years, Rasulullah didn't have what we call peace and security in the Arabian Peninsula to spread his word, to do tabligh and da'wah, to send his ambassadors around. He was constantly defending himself and his faith. But with this agreement, and the truce for 10 years, Rasulullah then had now peace of mind. Now no Muslim will be harassed by the mushrikeen. They can travel wherever they want. And he started the process of propagation, and this is in the latter months of the 6th year. Tabligh and Da'wah work was expedited now, because now the ambassadors and the muballighin and the du'at could go freely to convey the message of Rasulullah to other tribes and other countries. And the success can be seen in 3 years. First 6 years, nothing. Islam is confined to Medina. 3 years after Sulh Hudaybiyah, entire peninsula becomes in the fold of Islam. The 9th year is known as Amul Wufud, the year of delegations. So many delegations were coming in Medina to express their homage to Rasulullah and to do bay'at at his hand. And we saw that even within 2-3 years, even Mecca came into the hand of the Prophet without warfare, because they violated the conditions of the treaty that they had signed themselves. Because one of the allies of Mecca, attacked one of the allies of Muslims, and some people were killed on this side. They came and complained to Muslims in Medina. Rasulullah sent the message. You as the chief, party to this agreement, it is your duty to deal with your ally. Punish them or ask them to give compensation. But they refused. They were arrogant. They thought they were still very powerful as before. They said, we don't care. Rasulullah said, if that is the issue, then you violated the terms. And this is where Rasulullah, formed an army of 10,000, organized and trained and armed force, and he marched onto Mecca. And this was absolutely legitimate for him, because they violated the terms of the treaty, and Mecca was taken over without warfare. And so this is where we see that sometimes things are done by Allah and Anbiya and Mursalin Awliya. We are told to do certain things. In Zahir it seems, what is this? But we do not realize he is alimun bi aqibatul umur. He knows what will be the end. And therefore he basically, some things might look negative, but at the end there is positive consequences to what Allah, Rasul and the Imam have asked us to do. Salawat upon the Iqbal. And in Surah Fath, which is the surah which talks about this event, it's interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not used the word as-sulh. The word as-sulh has only come once in Quran, was-sulhu khair, and that is the sulh between husband and wife. Not between mushrikeen and Muslims of Mecca. And so that's where we have to realize that, perspectives are different. You have one person who looks at things, what Rasulullah is doing, and he says, I doubt his nubuwwat. Others that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is Fath Mubin. And this is where we see the difference between Zahir and Batin. Another example, where, maybe people might dislike certain things, but at the end, the result is actually positive, is during the life of the Imams. There was a companion by the name of Zurara bin Ayun, a companion of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wasalam. As well as the 6th Imam. He is one of the most prominent Sahaba of that era. The 6th Imam actually had said about him that if it hadn't been for him and 2 or 3 other individuals, he names them, that the ahadith of my father would have perished and vanished. And so he's a very important figure in the Shia, hadith and fiqh. But there was a time when our 6th Imam used to publicly condemn him and say negative things about him. You know, when we study hadith, one of the issues that we study is credibility of the narrator. And one of the sources that we go to look into it is what did the Imams say about this companion, if there is any statement from the Imams. And that's where we see that, sixth Imam, in some of his sayings, has publicly condemned Zurara bin Ayun as a bad person. And this was, of course, a serious matter for Zurara also. And so there is an interesting conversation between Abdullah bin Zurara, son of Zurara bin Ayun, who came to see the Imam. And Imam says to him, and this is where I'll come to this connection of this story with this ayat here. Imam says to him, اقرأ مني على والدك salam. O Abdullah, when you go to your father, convey my salams to him. وَقُلْ لَهُ, and say to him, إِنِّي إِنَّمَا أُعِيبُكَ دِفَاعًا مِنِّي عَنْكَ. Tell to your father that now Imam is addressing the father directly here, through the son, saying, tell him that aib goi, I say, bad things about you, because I would like to defend and protect your life. Why? إن الناس والعدو يصارعون إلى كل من قربناه وحمدنا مكانه. Because the enemies and the people in general who are not from our community, they very quickly go to seek those whom we hold dear to us and whom we have praised. And they do this, they go after them لإدخال العزا, in order to put harm to them, because they love us and because they are close to us. And they start condemning them. وَيَرَوْنَ إِدْخَالُ الْعَزَى عَلَيْهِ وَقَتْلُهُ, sometimes even to the extent of killing those who are close to us. وَيَحْمِدُونَ كُلُّ مَنْ عَئِبْنَاهُ. Whereas those whom we condemn, these enemies, promote them. Respect them. They don't do anything to them. Therefore Imam says, نحن فإنما أعيبك لأنك رجل اشتهرت بنا. I say bad things about you because you have come to be known as one of us, and you are inclined to us. And because of this, they condemn you. And there is a danger that they would harm you. فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أَعِيبَكَ. And therefore I started talking negatively about you so that they will leave you alone. They will think he is a good guy from their perspective. And وَيَكُونُ بِذَلِكَ مِنَّ دَافِعُ شَرِّهِمْ عَنْكَ. And this is the way I'm trying to prevent their evil from reaching you and touching you. And so Imam might zahiran, say something which is negative, but the end result is not negative. The end result is positive, to protect him. And then Imam says, يقول الله عز وجل أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فعرضت عن عيبها. According the words of Khizr, that as far as the boat, it belonged to the poor boatmen who used to work in the river, and I intended to make it defective. عيبها, and this is what Imam using the same term, that I am creating or associating aib with you so that the enemies will not consider you to be my follower and they will leave you alone. وَكَانَ وَرَاءُهُمْ مَلِكٌ يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ السَّفِينَ غَصْبًا. There was a king behind who would forcefully take all the good boats. هذا التنزيل من عند الله. And this is the revelation from the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, Imam says something very interesting. فإنك أفضل السفن ذلك البحر القمقام Zakhir, you are the best of the boat in that sea. He's relating what he is saying to him negatively to the boat. He's saying, as far as the boats are concerned, you are the best of the boats in that sea, which is going through storm. وَمِنْ وَرَائِكَ مَلِكٌ ظُلُومًا غَصُوبًا يَرْقَبُ عُبُورَ كُلِّ سَفِينَةٍ صَالِحَةٍ. And behind you is a zalim, occupying king who is looking at all the good boats, to take them by force. And this is where, he says, that is why I made you, symbolically the boat there, defective, so you will be rescued and saved from the zalim. Otherwise, his importance in the eyes of Imam says, فَافْحَمِ الْمَثَلِ يَرْحَمَكَ اللَّهِ. Understand this example and simile that I have given. فَإِنَّكَ وَاللَّهِ أَحَبُّ النَّاسِ إِلَيَّ. You are the most beloved of people to me. وَأَحَبُّ أَصْحَابِ أَبِي حَيًّا وَمَيِّتًا. And among the companions of my father, those who are dead or alive, you are the best of them. And that was the status of Zurara bin A'yun. But Imam sometimes said negative things about him publicly, especially when there were spies and informers of the government in that audience. So that in their list, Zurara would not be considered to be a follower of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, and they will leave him alone. Salawat pढ़ने के बाद. This is where we come to realize the issue that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَسَى أَن تَكْرِهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. Sometimes you might like things, not dislike things, but it is, good for you. And sometimes you will like and love things, but it is not good for you. And this is where we have to realize that, minor defects for averting a major defect is good by itself. Many times if we look back in our life, we will see there are minor issues. Now we'll say, oh, this was a minor issue. But when it happened, you were very distressed. Kind of, upset with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why me? But later on when you see, okay, something worse could have happened. In Iran, when you travel on the highway, they have this booth where you have to pay money to use the highway. Most of these taxi drivers, even drivers normally, there is a sanduq box right before the booth they'll put in. And there's a story of somebody, who used to do all the time, and then there was an accident. And the fellow was injured. He said, how can this happen to me? I gave the sadaqah before the journey. Why did it happen to me? As he was very angry, very upset with the whole system and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he went to an alim and he said, you don't know, maybe that day Malakul Maut was given your name. It was your sadaqah which saved you. You just injured but not killed. Look at it that way. A minor, defect is there so you can be, rescued from a major defect. Let me share with you, sometimes we should look at negativity in our own lives as a positive, blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll share with you, it's a personal example, but of myself. Just about 15 years ago, 1999, I think. A little bit less than that, of course. I was never, taking any medication. There's no problem, nothing. I didn't even have a steady doctor that I would go, no physical, exam annually, which is all free here. But I said, I'm okay, why do I have to do? Sometimes, maybe in winter when the flu is there, I'll just go to the walk-in clinic. And then all of a sudden, this is on a Wednesday of that week. I realized that I'm having difficulty in speaking. And I just come from a trip from Chicago and St. Louis. This was Rajab, busy month. I thought maybe I'm very tired, so I don't really care about it. Thursday night, Majlis, I recited. I realized, okay, this is worse than what was yesterday. Still, nothing clicked to me, what is it? But between Thursday night and Friday khutbah, I realized things have changed really drastically. It is serious. I had to go, and I went to the doctor after the Friday khutbah, namaz, and doctor says, you have a stroke. I said, a stroke? Because from what my lack of information about stroke was, your limb becomes, paralyzed or something. I'm walking, normal. The only problem I have is the speech. He said, no, you had to go to the emergency right away. Anyway, I went. When you think about it, later on all the tests were positive, everything, nothing was there until they did MRI and they said, well, you had actually more than once you had minor strokes. Looking back, of course, now I'm on medication. Alhamdulillah, that problem was a temporary problem. It was gone, alhamdulillah. When I look at that, I actually thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was a signal. But be careful. You have blood pressure, you can get into a more serious situation. And that is where, now of course I have to go for blood test every few months and, look at the medication, it's change, increase, decrease, or whatever. But looking back, for me that was not a bala. That was actually an alarm, call. Wake up call. That, you have to take care of yourself and look at your own situation. And so when we talk about what we call minor, irritants in life, look at it. Then maybe there was something more serious which could have happened. And that became then that minor irritants in life will become, a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our perspective will change completely. And so this is what we, learn from this example of the Safina, the way Khizr alayhi salam made it, a very minor, defect that they could still, use it and maintain it, but it was saved from the zulm of the king. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.